All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Gleason. I'm the Director of Planning and Construction for the Chicago Park District. I'd like to welcome you all this evening. And before I get started, I just want to give a couple of notes of thanks to our Alderman, Leslie Hairston, who's been very supportive and is here with us this evening. And I'd also like to thank our Vice President of the Chicago Park District Board, Avis Lavelle, for being with us this evening. Thank you very much. And of course, to our Superintendent, Mike Kelly, who's with us as well and has been very supportive through our whole process. So thank you all for your support through this, and we really appreciate all the time and effort everyone's put in. So after many months of community meetings and hundreds of comments from all of you, we're excited this evening to share a draft of the South Lakefront Framework Plan. Thank you to all of you who attended the previous 12 community meetings and numerous stakeholder meetings, providing your comments and preferences to help us craft a vision for the future of Jackson and South Shore parks. Tonight, we share the vision with your input that your input helped to create. We know we will not be able to meet every single request that all of you have made, so how do we come up with the vision that you're going to see tonight? Well, we listened mostly to numerous community members, park users, and subject matter experts, both internal and external, to the Park District. What we're showing here tonight represents really striking a balance between several things. Community comments and concerns that all of you have been gracious enough to share with us, extensive input from smaller stakeholder groups ranging from track and field coaches in the community to ecology groups that care about the natural areas, and yacht clubs and harbor groups, and that's just to name a few. We also heard a lot of very important input and want to make sure that we thank our park advisory councils. So we really want to thank the Jackson Park Advisory Council for their support, as well as the South Shore Cultural Center Advisory Council for their inputs this evening. We also consulted quite a few experts. I think you'll see when you go to the boards today that there was quite a lot of technical support that went into the beginning of our draft plan. So we've talked to experts in coastal management and stormwater runoff. We've consulted with our planning colleagues at the City of Chicago, as well as our transportation colleagues. And so I think you'll see that there's been a lot of input that's come from a lot of different experts in the field. And then also, last but not least for sure, is we've consulted a lot with our own Park District staff who run and manage our parks every day and know what all of you bring them to the desk and what you're looking for and all the things that happen in the parks and their expertise as well. So thank you to them for their input as well. I know the next thing you're all going to ask me is how are we going to pay for all of this? So let me remind you that this is a vision for the future of the parks. It is not going to be achieved in one day or even 1 year. This is a guide. It's a guide to help us all navigate the future of these parks together. This planning process will be an ongoing effort, and we are still taking comments on the vision that you'll see presented tonight. Even after this plan is published, and we do hope to go to our board sometime in April to present the final plan, some plans and designs will continue to evolve as projects come to fruition, and we'll be sure to come back to the community and show you those as they evolve. To that end, many of you have asked us about phasing or where we're going to start. How are we going to start implementing this plan that we're showing you? Well, we already know a couple of things that we'd like to get out of the gate right away. So the track and field at Stony Island will be relocated through the generous contribution of the Barack Obama Foundation, and we have boards here tonight with the design, and we're happy to answer your questions about it. We are hoping to go before the Plan Commission for that track and field plan this spring so we can start construction as soon as possible and get this important community amenity open for the public this fall. We also know that by moving the track and field, we will impact a couple of other programming resources, most importantly, baseball and softball programming in the parks. This season, we'll work with all of our teams to relocate games to other diamonds within the park. And then tonight, we're happy to announce that we will also be renovating, upgrading, and adding a third senior ball diamond to the area north of Hayes Drive, which you'll see in the presentation in just a moment. That work we hope to begin in the fall following baseball season. Now, before I preview any more, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Greg Halpina with Smith Group JJR to walk you through the draft plan. Greg was actually involved in the 1999 framework plan, for those of you who remember it, or are here tonight and worked on it, and so we're really happy to have his expertise and his experience as we've gone through this process. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you. A lot of familiar faces here tonight. It's great to see everybody back. Very exciting time for us. It's been a great journey through this process. But as Heather pointed out, it's not the end of the process as things move forward. This is a long-range plan, and the process will continue. Input will be sought, and it will guide us hopefully for the next 10 years. So again, when we started off, for those who are new to the process or even old to the process, we will point out the purpose again, really, which was to update a long-range vision, which really starts, again, be that roadmap as moving forward that gives us a guide to evaluate proposals. It's something that, again, is meant to be specific enough so we can evaluate it, but also wants to be flexible enough that it does evolve with time. 10 years is a long time for anything. A lot of trends change, technology change as well too, so we want to make sure that that's specific enough that you're able to give us your feedback, and it can be a good guide, but that it's able to evolve with time. So the process, for those who have been with us the entire way, we started back in June with discovery phase, with listening, came back in September for visioning. Scenarios were before the holiday in December, and based on that feedback through all of that process, in particular those December meetings when we had 3 different alternatives to walk through, we have taken all that input and we have drafted or created the draft framework plan, which you will see in the presentation as well as around the room on the boards here tonight. So again, very exciting time for the project and these parks. So how do we get here? As was pointed out, we have listened. We've been as visible as we can be. We have been in many places we can be. We've documented, whether it's small meetings, large meetings, comment cards, websites. I think we really, again, took the update of the 1999 plan very seriously. That was, as folks have told us, was a very important process to really listen and reflect that in the pages of that document. And we wanted to do nothing less to that. In fact, obviously take it further if we could here. So transparency and input has been very important, and hopefully you will see the recommendations here are reflective of your input. Hopefully you'll see bits and pieces of your own words in this document. So where you start to see those words, again, this has been in some of the previous presentations, the community vision that's sort of the high level as we envision this plan over the coming years, really balancing these sort of 3 tenets, the idea of a welcoming place for all, which really gets into the recreation, the uses of the park, and making sure it's connected both physically as well as culturally, to the community. Trying to find a balance of active and natural. Again, this park is being on the lakeshore and the habitat we have here, but also it's a park for people. It's always been about recreation as well too. So finding that balance, and then finally, again, this is making sure that it's an accessible beacon for the community. It's a welcoming place that will continue to be, whether it's your backyard, your front yard. This is a place that you're always comfortable coming and bringing your friends and family, hopefully. Looking at that vision, the other thing that we crafted, kind of taking the 99 process as well as the feedback from all these meetings, just best practices of industry planning, park district missions, kind of took that all together and came up with these 3 levels of guiding principles, 3 general topics. Again, serve the community, inspire the world, recognizing the role that these parks play. Whether you're across the street, whether you're coming in from out of town, whether you're coming from around the world for the cultural attractions here, finding a way that this park can do all, or that these parks can do all of that. Recognizing again that balance of environment and beauty, and stewarding that as we move forward. Recognizing that's one of the key aspects of this park, of these series of landscapes and facilities, and making sure that carries forward. And again, recognizing the historic cultural fabric we have here, the famous historic designers we have of buildings and landscapes, and the many things that have happened here, moments that many people in the room may have. But going back to World's Fairs and beyond, there's an amazing legacy here, making sure that we are mindful of that, but we also find a way to move forward. One of the constants of this park has been change over the years, and we've always done a pretty good job of trying to be loyal to that legacy, but we also make sure that we let this park evolve over time. So, the parks over time. The constant has been use. When you look at the Park District's mission, these are places for people. They always have been. If you look back to the 20s, the uses have changed and the fashions have changed, but oddly, it's always been a place for people. And I think we really have heard a lot of that through these meetings and looking back, that we don't want to lose sight of that these were places for escape for the millions of people who lived here and visited. And we want to make sure that we want to find that balance of nature and active, but always make sure that it's a place for people to use. And it's no different today. If you start to think about the tapestry of uses and users, this is you, whether you're fishermen or dog walkers or athletes or boaters. Again, there are so many uses in this park, or the series of parks here, that we're really trying to understand when we do this plan, how can we best recognize those uses and find the best way to advance the future of these spaces, to accommodate these uses, and these uses that, again, are evolving over time, so it's flexible enough. So we're going to tell the story tonight sort of through those lenses, through those users, through your lenses, and really kind of go into these 4 different categories of recreation, which sort of self-explanatory, water and ecology, connectivity, and cultural history. So I'm going to spend about hopefully 15, 20 minutes. We'll see how there's lots to present here tonight, going through kind of high level of these topics, and then we're going to spend the back half of the presentation going through the more detailed recommendations in the actual framework plan. So recreation, loosely, it's the land-based sort of turf use in these parks. Whether it's along the neighborhood edges, whether it's picnic areas, ball fields, you start to see sort of the different places in the map that just sort of give you a sense of the mixture we have here. It's the largest land use in the park, in Jackson Park and South Shore, whether it's sports fields or golf, or again, passive and picnicking spaces, but it represents a large piece of the pie, and so we put a lot of thought into making sure that is well taken care of in the future. One of the things we heard loud and clear, especially as some of the uses are starting to change, whether it's with the presidential center, whether it's golf, or just generally thinking about how patterns change here, is we didn't want to lose sight of one of the most precious uses in both of these spaces, which is just unprogrammed, casual, flexible picnicking, sort of hanging out spaces. There's never enough turf, even though there's a lot to maintain. There's never enough of this sort of space in an urban park of this size and location. So we wanted to make sure that there was always going to be a place for this, and it was, again, spread out equally through the spaces on the lakeshore, like you have at South Shore, around sports fields, and also not forgetting the neighborhood edge along Stony and 67th, and making sure that's also walkable. I don't have to drive to it. So again, as a core element, this was a very important piece that we tried to really knit into the design. The other thing, with the amount of use and programming and residents here, every space has to do 3 and 4 things. Flexibility, and from the start, these were designed as large grass meadows that could be used for one sport one day, a different sport the next day, a special event the following day, a large picnic the next day, a kite festival. There was always a need to do that, and that hasn't changed. There'll never be enough space in this park, so we want to make sure we keep thinking about these meadows, that they can support an active use like soccer, they can support an adjacent use like picnicking. We recognize that there's a really tight bond, a social fabric that goes with these sports, but also think about how we design them so that they can, again, one day be a ball diamond, the next day be a gridded field, the next day be something else too. So we've really looked closely at how we can do that moving forward. And that really starts to inform what we do in terms of some of the courts and playing fields that are throughout primarily Jackson Park. How do we start to think about designing those so they knit nicely into those historic meadows? How do we think about adjacencies? That what we have today is actually a series of different sort of sports cores. Some are on Hayes, some are on Cornell. You cross busy roads to get to them. Some are close to the neighborhood. We actually really made an intentional move here to try to get those clustered together, closer to each other. So soccer, ball diamonds, parking, comfort stations, picnicking, trail access. We really look for those sorts of connections. And then thinking about what belongs further in the park, what belongs on the neighborhood edge. So very intentional, but going back to the original programming of this park, those passive, flexible meadow spaces. That carries into the golf. I know there's been a lot of meetings and discussion about the golf courses, combining the 9-hole course here and the 18-hole course at Jackson Park. Again, times have changed with golf. Standards of how you design a golf course, the length of the equipment has changed that. So we've reflected that in the design, but we've also really looked at making sure that we don't lose that next generation of golfers. This is an incredibly popular sport in this community. All ages, but we heard loud and clear at some of our early meetings that we're starting to put that next generation of golfer at jeopardy if we don't make the investments here. And think about the type of course, the length of the course, that there's tee boxes for youth, but also support amenities, training facilities, the caddy programs, things that you've heard Mike and the Park District staff talk about too. So, loud and clear we've heard that, but also we've heard we don't want this to be something that that non-golfers can't enjoy as well too. So access within the golf course, trails through the golf course, making sure that nature is connected through the golf course, making sure that there's picnicking adjacent to it, making sure that fencing is done sensitively. So making sure that golf and other uses are knit well together has been a real important and a heavily discussed element of this plan. So that takes us to the next topic, which is water and ecology. From the start, this has been a water-based park system here. Lake Michigan, the lagoons were always the key driver to how these spaces came together, and they really still are today. It's a heavy land use and a great diversity of programs, from lagoons to harbors to beaches. It really does provide that core, but it's not just the water itself, it's the areas along the water. Again, the birders that are in the room and a lot of the ecologists, these are the spaces. There's a reason why we have the ecology we have in these spaces, because of that proximity to water. So we don't think of water and ecology separately, we put them together, and that's how we've been thinking about that in this design. So when we start to think about holistically, we actually as a team started thinking about this view from the lake instead of the view from the land, and how we can start to think about a better connected water system physically, so the lagoons connecting, we'll talk about that in a little bit here, but also a better constructed shoreline that does more, lagoons and marinas that start to perform a little bit differently, provide some new programs, so that this thing starts to be a connected blue system, a connected green system, and starts to take, again, a series of scattered sites that are great throughout Jackson and South Shore and really knit it into a whole greenway and blueway system. That really becomes, again, a centerpiece that again, 10 miles of different shorelines, whether it's the lagoons or the lakeshore, as well as 90 acres of natural areas. So again, trying to take that legacy and carry it forward. But also thinking about the role that infrastructure has to play today is different. A shoreline doesn't just need to stop waves anymore. It needs to be able to provide habitat above the ground and below the water. It needs to be able to stop those waves. It needs to provide public access, recreation. Some places it provides power generation. They tend to do 4 and 5 different things here. So we start to think of the idea of a performance landscape, that these water bodies can do more and more of those sorts of things. So that I talked about the lakeshore, but the lagoons were kind of a big challenge for us. We heard some of the issues with the lagoons was about water quality, and it kind of got us thinking, what was the issue? Some of it is runoff into the lagoons. Some of it is the lack of Lake Michigan water from the lagoon being filled in over the years. So those are things that we've addressed. We have reconnected Lake Michigan from the inner harbor into the lagoon system. We also are proposing a series of land treatments that start to make the water better as it goes into the lagoon. But we're also recognizing that there's a lot of turf in this park, that actually the nutrients in that lagoon, which is phosphorus, to get a little technical, actually is great for grass. So if we can start to think about cleaning the water that goes into the lagoon, but also take the water that has some of that nutrient and use it on the grass, it becomes a great system here that starts to lower the operating costs of some of those grass spaces. So think about how that works with sports fields that are adjacent to the lagoons, the golf course, et cetera. Something we really thought about, that this is not just about visual water, it's about the use of water and the function of it. And that starts to get into what that meant with connecting the lagoon. It wasn't as easy as just making it a water connection. There are different grades, and there was a lot of discussion with crowds like this about using that water. Should I be able to have a kayak and canoe on it? Should I not be able to? Where can I do that? It's not a yes or no answer. So we came up with a solution that connects and does allow a level of boating and use, but it also provides separation from the areas that have been recently restored that we don't want to have boating. So we can start to think about paddle boats on Columbia Basin, we'll talk about later, but we can actually think about the inner harbor morphing into something very different that has power boats like today, but it also starts to have kayaks and canoes that can use a portion of the new lagoon without impacting the portion that is most sacred and recently restored. And thinking about how that will attract water and human use, as well as carrying on that tradition of habitat and edges that has already been part of the restoration work. So one of the most popular things coming out of the December meetings was the idea of connecting the lagoon. A lot of people, I think from the water perspective, people love the shoreline, kind of reworking the shoreline, but they love this idea of connecting the lagoon. But we also heard from a lot of the sports users that we want to make sure there was a balance. There had to be enough turf for the ball diamonds, the soccer, again, the active uses. So we went back to the drawing board a little bit and found a way to connect the lagoon, but actually flip it. So we actually had it kind of down the middle of the ball fields. We flipped it to the side, and we found a way that we can keep more of the sports fields, make that actually a better program, use the lagoons, create that habitat. We think that's a real win-win, and it starts to do those performance things that I talked about. And then we start to think about other ways that the lagoons, again, can be used, whether it's, again, use of the water with Columbia Basin, or having access without touching the water, more sensitive areas, boardwalks and things like that as well, too. So again, just trying to provide a little more access, but also in different ways that's most appropriate to the location within the parks. And then finally, for the water section, is thinking about the beaches. This is focused more on South Shore, but I think the general idea of, again, finding that balance of landscapes, facilities, making sure that we have top-notch facilities, whether it's renovating something existing, whether it's providing a new facility that's proposed at South Shore, and making sure that we can keep as much of that beach habitat that provides both wildlife but also protects the land behind it, but also making sure we don't lose sight that, again, we want to have these flexible lawn spaces that we can picnic, we can hang out, so I can spend the entire day there. So as again, trying to find that balance for all of our beaches so that really do provide something for everybody and something for all day as well. So that takes us to connectivity. So we're going to do all of that. Well, it's important we can get to it and get around. So there's been a lot of discussions. CDOT has been talking a lot about some of the road closures and things associated with the Presidential Center as well as golf, Cornell. We'll talk a little bit about that, but I want to spend a little more time on the rest of it, which is really getting into the trails, parking, and really looking at it as a holistic system. Again, how does it benefit me as a park user? So as we've been hearing, there will be some changes proposed. Cornell, you see sort of dashed there. So this would be the future road system, the primary road system in Jackson Park, where Cornell is closed and Marquette is closed. And there are some restructuring of Lakeshore Drive and other roads to accommodate that. But at the same time, we wanted to look at not just driving through the parks, but also parking. We recognize that, again, a lot of folks visit here. We recognize we don't want to turn Jackson Park into Jackson parking lot. That's not something anybody wants to do here. So we really looked at the existing parking lots and trying to find ways that we could modify them to be more efficient, making sure they're in the right places to best serve the recreation, make sure walking distances from them are convenient, but trying to do it in the most sensitive way so they don't start impacting the precious landscape we have here. So all of the parking lots shown in this map are existing parking lots that have been reconfigured to be more efficient, except for we have added one parking lot by the new golf pavilion on Jeffrey, which is part of, again, that new facility being in that location necessitated that. But we've generally moved the cars around and try to keep that existing quantity of parking in the park and hopefully just make it more accessible and convenient for you. And then not losing sight of that you have a transit system here, whether it's metro along the west edge, bus routes, so thinking about driving, parking, taking transit, making sure, again, that you have access in many ways to get to all the attractions that are here. And then kind of finishing all of that with a great trail system. Thinking about the primary trails, lakefront trails, multi-use trails, of really kind of creating, in a way, extending that street grid all the way to the lake so that you've got primary things that start to serve the different quadrants of the park. And then knitting that further together with sort of that quieter level of walking trails and sidewalks. You start to create loops and again, different experiences. So I can bike in, I might walk more quietly, but I have this great network where I can spend the entire day and explore different areas. And then taking it down even to the next level, which is sort of that nature trail and boardwalk. So I can go from big trail, ride fast, smaller trail, walk and enjoy, small, real quiet trail where I can go and really sort of escape in nature. So we really intentionally try to create that whole hierarchy. And again, that's all really necessitated by taking a hard look at these parks because of the Presidential Center and the golf road closures. So again, that's a great example of looking at this really generated some great new ideas. And then finally, looking at culture and history. As I mentioned, the attractions here, they're steeped in history, they're popular, whether it's a historic building like the Iowa Building or Cecil Partee, or whether it's a world-class attraction like Museum of Science and Industry, the South Shore Cultural Center, or new attractions like the Presidential Center. We want to think about how this is going to work in both these facilities, parks, but also how they can work together. How can I, as a visitor, start to sort of walk the cultural trail of President Obama's life, or how can I go through the history of Jackson Park and the World's Fair. So start to think about how these start to connect up, whether it's through trails or whether it's through social media or other ways. So it's not just a series of buildings and sites, but it's actually part of what you do when you come to these parks. And so again, that mixture, as I mentioned, are destinations old and new, with again the Obama Presidential Center being added to the mix that we already have. But also thinking about some of the new life for some old friends that are in both parks. The Iowa building, bringing it back to a premier picnic facility that really activates kind of the corner of the park that could use that. Or the Burnham building, I think with the golf course renovation of bringing new life to that facility. There's a whole bunch of other examples, but these are a couple that, again, we want to look at. Again, the investments happening here that Heather pointed out are ways that we can start to do this as part of those projects. And not losing sight of the landscape itself. This is an historic landscape, Frederick Law Olmsted. There's a great legacy left. We've done a lot of work understanding what's still intact, how much of it is high integrity, and how much of it preserves sort of these principles of the original design of these great long vistas, the tree-lined open meadows that the uses may have changed, but the character is still there, whether it was an open meadow or whether it's a golf course, it still has that open volume. Or the water itself, again, it was a big part of the design, was not only the water as an aesthetic, but the water use. It was a heavily programmed water system. So some of the things that we're talking about here go back to that, but they demand a new thought based on contemporary needs, which is why the design does what it does. So again, making sure that is always central to these changes in both sites. So that's sort of part one. There's a lot to cover here, but that kind of gives you an overview of just from a systems level, again, recreation, water and ecology, connectivity and culture and history of just some of the big ideas. So I'm now going to spend the remainder of the presentation showing you how that's actually applied site by site within both Jackson and South Shore. So the framework, this is what the overall plan looks like today, which is we will be able to look in very close detail at all of this on the boards in a little bit, but ultimately this is the overall design. And I'm going to walk you from north to south and give you just, again, the kind of the high points of each zone. So just to orient you, again, Museum of Science and Industry in the center, Stony Island on the west, obviously Lake Michigan on the east. Picnicking has been a very popular use in this area. We have added one picnic grove, that's the Iowa building. So again, a nice twofer there, restore a historic building, bring another popular use to the neighborhood edge. The bowling green, we thought, again, is there a way to start to add some amenities where we have a facility there? So keeping the greens in place, but starting to bring some new sports that we're hearing a lot about that there's a desire. The idea of pickleball, which uses a much smaller footprint than tennis, but that same general idea. So knitting those together around the bowling green. Starting to think about how we can renovate the facilities in 59th Street Harbor to serve both the harbor as well as non-boaters, more of a community program there. Thinking about some of the images I showed about paddling and boardwalks along the lagoon and Columbia Basin. Starting to just continuing the work with the Obama Presidential Center, the Museum of Science and Industry, of just making sure there's an indoor-outdoor cultural programming that's happening in special events. It's already happening, just making sure that we continue that. Connection of paths, and adding a little tweak to the playground that we have at the corner of 59th and Stony, starting to bring a splash pad element. That was something we heard from some of the stakeholder meetings. So not a lot of big physical changes there, but a lot of little moves here that are going to just make that zone just a lot better over time. So moving into really the core of Jackson Park. This is Jackson Park Central. This probably has the most going on in terms of new proposals and change, and it really starts with one big idea of the Obama Presidential Center. It's a pretty big investment, and again, you've heard a lot about that. We're not going to go into detail tonight about that, but that being on this neighborhood edge sort of sets a few things in motion. The track, the new track that Heather spoke about along Stony is part of that. The idea of a reconfigured Hayes Fields is a result of that, of starting to think about not only just mitigating the loss of a field, but how can we do it better, which we think we've got a good solution here. The idea generally of how that Hayes Fields and East Meadow area can work better than it does today in terms of active recreation. Thinking about how golf and the water system can be a big part of that. So kind of looking at that whole area, as I pointed out, we decided that maybe having that lagoon or bayou connection to the west would actually create a nice connected green space of sports that's served by central parking, it's served by an existing comfort station. That comfort station actually could be much more than that too. There's a great concession potential for that being on the water, being by sports, being by parking. So there could be revenue opportunities, and again, just new life around those facilities, surrounded by picnicking. That was made possible by sliding the driving range to the north. And then that necessitated the idea of actually putting the dog park along the lagoon in a position that will be next to parking and be a little more accessible for that too. So those pieces kind of all go together as one proposal, all kind of trying to find a way to make these things work better together as neighbors. So picnicking, as a result of that, we've actually added 3 new picnic groves. And they're closer to the neighborhood edge again, really to the west of the Bayou Connection or Lagoon. Football fields, we have lost one, but again, we are rebuilding synthetic turf with the track, and we're providing flexible fields at the East Meadows as well as overlap on some of the ball diamonds. So there could be other ways to configure that actually gain some of that back. Driving range and dog park we talked about. A new cluster of the ball diamonds that can be properly graded to drain, they can be lighted, they can start to become, again, a really contemporary facility out there that we can get a lot more out of what we could have done today. The new track and field, with the Bayou Connection becomes more natural connection. We're also showing to the west of the driving range the potential of expanding the Bobolink Meadow as well as part of that, so that whole water-based greenway system extends and just becomes even stronger. Multi-use trail connections. Actually, this area has 2 different underpasses proposed, one close to Lakeshore Drive, one closer to Stony, to be able to facilitate north-south connectivity. We have, between pickleball kind of taking over and just looking at trends, we have reduced the number of tennis courts. There used to be 20 in the park, or there are currently today. There would be 9 plus another 8 pickleball courts. So we think, again, we're diversifying that court program, and we're putting it in consolidated places closer to the neighborhood edge, which we think is going to be better than kind of where it's at today, which is kind of hard to get to closer to the lakeshore. Basketball is going to stay the same. It's going to move slightly to the north, but remain along Stony. This scheme shows a renovation of the existing field house. Again, we've heard loud and clear how important that facility is. In this core scheme, we show the idea of renovating that in place, but we've also heard loud and clear that if there were funds available, you would love a new one. And so we have, okay. I think we got a little support for that idea. So this illustrates one location that could go. So it shows the idea that it could be located, again, in the same general vicinity of the field house. It could start to share some of the existing parking and drop-off facilities, and it could free up some green space for the existing field houses as well, too. So that really becomes a whole new design for the park entrance at 63rd. So exciting ideas, and it really works well with the track. So if you think about that whole investment along here, and as Heather pointed out, the track's going to happen this year. The baseball diamonds are going to happen soon. Golf, Obama Presidential Center, a lot of good things happening, and again, it's all based on your input. So moving further to the south, we'll talk about the lagoon, about the harbors. Again, we met with a lot of the voters throughout this process and trying to understand kind of where the market's going and where we best want to invest. The inner harbors always had challenges with height restrictions that it prohibits sailboats and some of the larger craft. And so there's been a bit of a challenge kind of keeping that full, and there's been a little more interest in the outer harbor because it's a little more unencumbered with heights and such. But the outer harbor does have some issues with wave climate and things too. So what this plan starts to show is a way to address all of that. We start to change the mix of those harbors. We start to migrate some of the boats from the inner harbor to the outer harbor. So we add more slips in the outer harbor. We have a few less in the inner. But we start to replace those ones in the inner harbor with something else we've been hearing some support for, which is, again, more the quiet craft, so canoeing, kayaking, and educational programs. Again, and speaking with the boating community, they would love this to teach that next generation how to do this right, how to be safe. So starting to think about that inner harbor being a little quieter, more educational, and making the outer harbor more efficient. So we've reconfigured some of the parking, the edges along that to make that work. Both schemes show contemporary dock facilities where there would be a controlled head pier. So again, things that you're seeing in other harbors throughout Chicago through the Westrex system. And probably most importantly, a way of protecting the harbor from waves that actually adds more land at 63rd Street Beach. Again, we've heard a lot about parking issues out there, just how popular it is, and if we had more land out there for picnicking, parking, how well used it would be. So the idea of putting additional land to protect the harbor that adds space for 63rd Street Beach really seemed like a nice combination to put together. So kind of rolling all of that up, we add a picnic grove. The dog park moves along the inner harbor. I talked about the slip mix, modifying a little with the inner and outer harbor. The coastline, kind of buried the lead there. So again, one thing we heard a lot about too was over time there will be a need to reconstruct this shoreline. I don't have the date of that, but it's one of the older sections in Chicago, and there is going to be a date when that happens. So it's good to have a plan for what you want when it's time. And we heard loud and clear at the last meeting that something more than just a concrete steps or something that was really desirable to the community. So this shows the idea of more of a living coastline that starts to create various different shapes and public access points, pebble beaches, overlooks, places that get down by the water. Again, it attracts humans, it blocks the waves, it provides connectivity, it provides habitat. All those things align with funding too. So I really think that combination with what's at 63rd Street really transforms that shoreline into something really special moving into the next generation of Jackson Park. We're almost there. So moving to the southern edge, the golf course. I'm not going to get into great detail about the golf course. I know there have been public meetings on that. High level, 18 holes in Jackson, 9 holes in South Shore, combined into one premier golf course that is really what you all deserve in this community. And premier does not mean inaccessible. It does not mean elite. This is a program that is rooted in this community, and that is the inspiration of this design. It is a contemporary design in terms of length and space. It has tee boxes that are short enough for the kid who's learning. It's got tee boxes for what you have today. It has tee boxes for people like me who want to believe I'm like Tiger Woods and can hit the ball for 300 yards all the time too. If I want to do it, it gives you a bit of all of that. And that's where the market's going, and that's how this place will start to become self-sustaining, get the rounds back up to where they were, but also start to, again, invest in that next generation of golfers as well. Not just with the tee boxes, but things like the short course, things that start to bring that teaching component into the facility. Again, one of the big changes from, I think, the last time we were in front of you was the idea of the golf pavilion moving along Jeffrey. This does a lot of neat things, actually. One is it brings a facility to a piece of the park that's not really well served by public. It's got a fence line. We've heard that pretty loud and clear, that there's a fence line, not a lot of ways to get in there, and I have to go pretty far to a building or restrooms and such. So that becomes a public facility that's on that edge. It also allows the golf courses to have returning 9 holes to that location. So again, we heard a lot about how many folks love to play 9-hole rounds here, and this gives that ability for that to happen, whether it's on sort of the landside course or whether it's on the South Shore direction as well too. So again, I think it got to be a better golf course because of your input and a better park neighbor. One of the neighbor issues is actually providing the connectivity. So when Marquette is closed to provide more space, again, the team heard you. It's now showing as a multi-use trail that connects through the golf course. So again, I think a lot of win-wins there. So again, I think a better golf course, integrating nature throughout the course, those trail connections, the underpass at Jeffrey is part of that, and the rest we maintain a lot of what's existing and precious along the edge, the playgrounds, green space as well. Thank you. And then finally to South Shore, the other piece of the golf course. So this would be again, holes 13 through 17, which is another neat piece of the drama of this course, that you start to really have your closing holes of your round along the water. That's great as a daily golfer. If we are so fortunate to host a tournament here, which would be fantastic, these would be unbelievable from that perspective, that the most dramatic holes of the entire tournament would happen with the view of the water and such too. So pretty neat development there. But other neat developments, that if I'm not a golfer, that kind of space between the golf holes has evolved into a very large and connected green space with trail connectivity that doesn't just go to it, but goes through the golf course. So think about this from the nature sanctuary, which the course did make some modifications to protect more of that up to the wetlands. So we have more of that than previous schemes, loop trails around it. But that trail from that corner connects all the way back into Jackson Park through the underpass at 67th Street. So that system, again, through input, has gotten bigger, better connected, more diverse. It's been a good balancing act, as Heather pointed out. So I think with that, the course has gotten better. The beach, new beach house there, adventure or nature play is part of that. So again, that idea and making sure we protect those picnic areas. So great beach, great facilities, play, picnicking, something you're going to spend all day out here, kind of like you do today, but just with much better facilities. So great, thank you. So that's a quick tour through the draft framework plan. As I pointed out, this is sort of the end of the framework plan journey, at least for the formal process. We will be Obviously, taking feedback tonight. The open comment session will continue through this month. It will go to the park board in April, and it will be a living document over time as well. Again, I don't think the park district ever stops listening about their park, so stay tuned on that. So tonight, we do have comment cards. We encourage you to share your thoughts on those. Again, we're not done listening. The website is still open, so that is a place to keep providing input to us. So kind of in conclusion, I kind of go back to the guiding principles. That's where we started. Guiding principles determined the program, determined the designs we did, and we've been trying to achieve these, and that's still the guide. And I think as you go to the boards tonight, they are on the back wall, but keep these in mind. This is what we're still trying to meet. This is still the measures of success for the design. And as things move ahead in years to come, we still want to make sure we look back at these to make sure we're doing the right thing. We think that the plan does achieve all of these. And we also, by doing all that, there's some pretty cool things that come out of all of this. These are some of just the highlights from the framework plan. We're adding acreage, whether it's new parkland along the lakeshore, some of the lake fill we talked about along La Rabida and 63rd Street. That's providing another 13 acres of habitat. And again, water-based, diverse, connected habitat. Cannot speak enough about that. It's a chance to actually be better than we are today. We've added 17 miles of trails and sidewalks through, again, looking really closely at circulation because of the road closures. The goal was, again, to respect the past and think about the future, and we think the plan has done that, and these are some of the metrics of that. So I want to thank you for all of your time through this process. At this point, that concludes the presentation. Our team will be ready at the corners at the boards here to take any questions, and I thank you very much. Good night.